Hi, everybody. I'm Anna Hagan. This is Next in Sales, a next level podcast. I am so excited to introduce you guys to my guest today. I have Tom Straszewski with me. Tom is a veteran in the advertising and media industry, specifically in sales. Tom, thanks so much for joining me today.
Anna, thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to our conversation.
Of course. Well, you and I have gotten to know each other pretty well via a couple of different conversations. I'd love if you could give a little bit of background on yourself to our viewers so they can get to know you a little bit better before we dive right in.
Happy to. So, 20 years plus, I think now in the advertising and media industry. Time has just totally flown by. My entire career has been focused on accelerating brands to better connect with their customers in a more efficient way. So if I look back, even in the beginning of my career, that's really been sort of the spirit of what I've done. And if I go back to the very beginning, even after college, many of my friends opted to travel to Europe, backpacking across the continent. And I decided to start my career immediately into sales. Looking back, I probably should have done that 6-month trip, but I didn't. But I was really eager to get into sales and really eager to start my career. So just jumped right into it. Right. What's ironic is my father spent his whole career in the advertising business, ironically with NBCU, where I also worked. And I decided to follow a bit in his footsteps. And the last few things I think to talk about a bit with my background is the very beginning, I was selling television to local and regional clients. And don't want to date myself, but some of the programming that I had was LA Lakers, a show called Murder, She Wrote, and a sitcom called Alf, which was about an alien puppet, is sort of where I began.
I've seen this. Yes, I remember.
I mean, not many people, I think, remember Alf, but that was one of my primetime shows that I was selling. And it was, believe me, my sales pitches were really interesting about Alf. So it's good to hear that you remember him. But really, after about 4 years of selling, I quickly moved into sales leadership, and I added digital sales experience and more recently e-commerce and affiliate. So really enjoyed career stops at big and large corporations, Comcast, NBC Universal, Ampersand, and much more recently with a leading social commerce site called slickdeals.net, where I left a few months ago. So last thing I'll say is I think what's unique about my experience that's a little bit differentiated, I think, in the marketplace is that I really have sort of the full sales funnel of experience from upper funnel awareness television, middle funnel digital advertising, and then more recently with the bottom of the funnel, e-commerce and affiliates. So pretty proud of having different disciplines in the advertising marketplace for sure.
Absolutely. Well, and kind of going back to the very beginning of your sales career, what is maybe one thing that you wish you had known at the beginning? And when and how did you learn that?
Yeah, I mean, I was a bit naive right out of college. I think I spent maybe 2 months of summer with my folks and then quickly got a job and dove right into it. Didn't know much about sales. And I, traditionally in sales, you sometimes start in advertising as a sales planner, more of a support role. But I started as an actual sales executive working with clients, at 23 plus years old. So really young getting into it. And I didn't know much about it at all. And what was a little bit tough in the beginning is my very first sales manager leader really often only talked about closing deals and exceeding budgets, and nothing else was important to him, right? So I spent a lot of time focusing on my numbers and getting deals versus spending time and energy on really learning what my clients needed. So what happened is I quickly learned that listening to customers and listening to their needs would help me identify what type of value I could provide to them. And that quickly became job one for me. So what also happened, I think, if I look back, is as my sales experience developed a bit, I really moved into more of a consultative sales approach. And that even at times, if what I was offering didn't meet the needs of the clients, at the very end of the sales process, right? If I really believed that if what I had wouldn't help clients, I would be really honest and upfront, and I would offer alternative suggestions, even if it was a competitor, and even if it meant losing a deal, because in my opinion, building trust is, if not the most important trait, it's one of the most important traits. And I've carried that all the way through today, if I look back at my sales career, for sure. So that was important to me,
Absolutely.
for sure.
Yeah, and that's something that you and I have talked a ton about, is just the importance of trust and relationship building. If you don't have that in sales, then you can be good, but you will never be great.
Yeah, I also think it's a little bit is the character of who you are, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't want to get too down the rabbit hole, but even working with different sales folks, it's the character you develop, whether it starts with the family that you were raised in, and or the people and friends you've associated with, or the trade organizations that you get involved with. That a lot of times, getting that integrity and honesty and hard work and empathy is all based on learned experience, but some of it's also the character of who you are. And it starts even in a really early age. And I was fortunate to have really supportive, fantastic parents, and I think that carried into my career for sure.
Absolutely. So, one of my favorite questions to ask, because I always find the answers super entertaining, is what is maybe the most creative way that you've ever closed a deal?
So, got to go back many years ago. I was, this was still in the television side of the business where I began. And I was working with or prospecting a client who was an owner of a car dealership. And at the time, he was selling Jeeps. He also had Oldsmobile, which are no longer being manufactured. So this is also dating myself. But he was the owner of the dealership was extremely competitive. He would always talk about winning. I want to win the sales race. I want to win against my other car dealers in the marketplace. I want to get across the finish line the quickest. But at the same time, he was really intimidating. He had a intense stare. When I would go to see him in his office, he had a huge oak desk. His shirts were unbuttoned a little bit. You could see a scar from open heart surgery. It reminded me a little bit of Marlon Brando as the Godfather. It was that type of intimidation when I was still really young in my career. He was a heavy advertiser in local radio and local newspaper. And for many months, as I would pitch him, he had no interest in what I was offering, which was television. So after getting a lot of no's and getting comments to leave my dealership often, I decided to take a different approach. And what I did is I purchased a small cast iron toy Jeep, and I found a checkered flag, and I put it in a box. I sent it to him with a note that said, "Hey, if you partner with me, you will win the race, and you'll beat your competition." The next day, I got a call from him. He ultimately became my largest client for many years. And it was really interesting transition for me because I was a good seller, but until I did something really creative and different, I started to become a really effective seller. And I think even that car dealership story, not too long after that big deal, I was really billing well. I had my first chance to become a sales leader, and I sort of thank that car dealer for helping me succeed and do well with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you said that you made a transition into sales leadership pretty shortly after that. And I know that you've helped scale and create some really, really successful and effective sales teams. But what do you think are the biggest pain points that hiring managers are facing today when it comes to hiring for sales organizations?
Yeah, I think the pain points today are still the overall organization of the hiring process, right? And what I mean by that is from sourcing candidates to skill matching to setting up interviews to post-interview scoring, ultimately offering and onboarding can be very difficult, as it has always been from a long time. I think it comes down to, for managers and sales organizations, is how do they invest in the hiring process overall? And I've worked with sales organizations who've built recruiting teams internally, and even brought aboard really good people from agencies where I've seen it work. In other instances, I've worked in sales organizations that they've only outsourced with hiring agencies, and they do 100% of all the work. And I've also seen that work really effectively. And then lastly, I've been in orgs where there's been a hybrid of both, a little bit of internal investment, a little bit of external investment. But I think ultimately what every team is aspiring to do is to be successful in who they find, and to try to improve the quality of the people that they're getting. I also think that in today's day and age, with a lot of fragmentation and a lot of organizations competing for good talent, what I've recently sort of come to the conclusion in is outsourcing today can become very effective and very efficient. You may be familiar with business processing outsourcing, or BPO, across many industries: Amazon, Walmart, Chevy. Technology and advancements in data and analytics have created outsourcing to be much more powerful than it was even 10 years ago. So I think back to your suggestion of pain points, I think the companies that invest smartly, but also do consider outsourcing and agencies can really move ahead of the competition. For sure. And I think the last thing I'll say is, I think remote work is also a pain point that companies are dealing with today, right? And I don't think remote makes the hiring process more difficult. I think it's just different, right? I think companies need to sort of understand that, and that even leaders have to be smart about realizing that. I'm a big fan of hybrid policies to help employees realize a better work and life balance. But I do think in the sales industry, which I've been a part of from day one, it's really important to come into the office a few days a week. And the reason why I say that is, with my experience and time again, I've seen the benefits of teamwork, competition, sharing best practices, one-on-ones with the sales leader. And then lastly, I think I've seen junior sellers become really good really fast when they can hear more seasoned sellers a cube away learn how they pitch and how they overcome objectives. And seeing that live from a cubicle away can be really invaluable. And that's why I think in sales, remote is good, but I'm a fan of hybrid at least a few days a week for sure.
Absolutely. I love working hybrid. I work hybrid at Next Level, and it's my favorite thing. Being able to spend a little bit of time at home and time in the office with my colleagues and getting to hear what they're up to and see how they process things differently than I might.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So, you mentioned obviously that you've worked with a lot of companies that have done outsourcing to recruiting agencies. When do you think it makes the most sense to bring in a recruiting agency and work with them as opposed to doing everything internally?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the investment side, right? I've seen all different levels work really well. I do find, though, that now with recruiting agencies, and I mentioned the technology and the advancements of reporting and dashboards and being able to in-source candidates and track everything from a resume submission to skill assessment to scheduling interviews. The outsourcing agencies of today versus 10 years ago have, in my opinion, truly expanded and accelerated to a rate where I find them incredibly valuable. But again, it could be a smaller sales organization where there just isn't time to do it, so an agency makes sense. It can be a larger organization where you maybe have in-house recruiters and people officers, but they can't handle everything. And my more recent experience is that agencies that are really good and adept at understanding what a sales organization truly needs are the ones that separate themselves from the competition and use data, use analytics, use their scheduling organization power, but also the ability to identify good talent in the marketplace when maybe a sales company isn't as adept as that, I think can be really powerful. So I think it's individual based on the sales org. But again, I think outsourcing today is better than it's ever been.
Well, and let me ask you this, obviously you've helped build out a lot of different recruiting processes and interview processes. What is your favorite question to ask when interviewing for sales? And what does the answer to that question tell you?
So
asking you to give up all your secrets.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna hold my best result. I'll give you that. It's funny. I think a lot of sales leaders sort of try to find their pristine best in class question that they want to ask a candidate. I think it's great. In my experience, I don't necessarily have a favorite question. And the reason why I said is candidates and positions vary greatly. Even in the sales industry, they vary greatly, right? I instead have a favorite exercise during an interview process. And I learned that, a lot of the candidates that I've met with come to an interview already with pre-canned responses to questions that they think I'm going to ask, right? They've spent a lot of time preparing of what my sales org is, who the people are, what our products are. So I kind of already expect a candidate to know those. And sometimes I think questions can be a little misguided because they may already have the answer. So I sort of flip the script on them a little bit. And in my mind, to be an exceptional seller, you need to think on your feet. You need to overcome objections. You need to perform well in times of stress. So I often get them out of their comfort zone in an interview. And instead of a favorite question, I actually ask them to role play with me in an interview. So what I do is I provide a candidate with a sales scenario. We're selling cars at a dealership. We're selling trucks. The demographic is men 25-54. I've got 300 units on my lot. Here's some price points. Here's my competition. So I give them a little bit of a scenario and give them a little bit of time to think it through, including features and benefits. And then I ask them to pitch me. If I was a customer looking to buy a car, how would you as a salesperson pitch me as a prospective car buyer? And what I found is that pitch exercise can be a really good method to uncover great sales talent from mediocre sales talent. And sales candidates need to be prepared for the unexpected. So why not sort of assess that skill set in an interview process? And Anna, quite frankly, I've had incredible success by doing that over many, many years versus just sort of having a favorite question.
Yeah, no, and I think that that's so important because you can uncover so much about how they sell and what you can coach and what you might not be able to coach. And then there are other people who are going to be more comfortable when they're selling than when they're not. Yeah. So being able to tap into that in an interview environment, I think is massively valuable.
Yeah. And I make it where it's not stressful. I explain to them that, there isn't a perfect answer, but I really want to hear from them on how they think in an unexpected situation, right? And I ask hard questions about their products I'm not looking for the perfect answer. I'm looking for how do they listen and how do they work to provide features and benefits and value in those exercises. And you'd be surprised. I've had several interesting stories about candidates who didn't expect that role play and some shocked faces, but other folks who just embrace it and they run with it and they're really good. And those are the ones that I'm lucky to hire and bring aboard because they tended to be the ones that were really successful for me.
Absolutely. Well, let me ask you another fun question about your personal sales experience. What is maybe your favorite Hail Mary sales tactic for when you feel you might lose out on a deal?
Yeah, Hail Mary sales tactics. So I don't necessarily have what we would call the question is a Hail Mary sales tactic. To me, a Hail Mary is a desperation play in the playbook of sales, right? Sort of the last ditch effort. And what do I do? I'm not going to get the deal. What's sort of the final pitch?
Quota is this close, and I just got to make it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think a seller, or at least sellers that I've worked with, I don't think they should ever feel that type of desperation, right?
Yeah.
I subscribe to the belief that when you hear a no from a client, that's when the selling really begins. And to me, that's the challenging part, but it's also the fun part, right? But most importantly, if a seller has done a really good job with client needs analysis, listening, understanding how they can provide value to a customer, you'll generally get to yes. In fact, the close should be the easiest part of the sale. But if you do get a no, then, and that's when the selling starts, you really have to sort of reset everything. You've got to understand, well, hey, I didn't meet the needs of the client, or they've got other objections. So you should go back and have additional conversations to really figure out what is most needed versus a Hail Mary sales technique. And that's what I found has been helpful for me, at least.
Absolutely. Well, Tom, you've definitely helped coach a ton of different amazing salespeople throughout your career. How do you maybe motivate salespeople who are struggling or experiencing setbacks, and what strategies have been effective for motivating either yourself or them in the past?
Yeah, motivation is found in any sales org, in any organization for that matter, and it's a really important one to coach through, right? Not only is it important for a sales leader to grow, but it's equally important for a seller to grow themselves. And I think sort of the output of a good motivating coach is trust building, as we've talked about earlier in our session here. Simply, salespeople will perform at a higher level if they trust their sales leaders and they trust their sales peers, right? I've been in offices where there hasn't been trust, and it's incredible how deflating and a lack of motivation that I find when there isn't that trust. It's, people don't even want to come into work if it's bad. Yeah. So you got to build trust, but I also think a good sales leader must understand their sales team's individual skills, their individual personalities, and what really drives them. Because every sales team, and in my experience, everyone's a little different, and you want different personalities and diversity, of course. But a good sales leader understands what those are and is able to adjust their sales a little bit and lead and motivate in the right way, right? And you should understand, a leader should understand that a salesperson may be motivated by compensation or career pathing or recognition, which are all important, but sellers have different priorities of each of those motivators, and a sales leader should understand what those are for sure. I think the last few things, and it's kind of an art form in motivation, is need to be a great communicator. But what I find incredibly important in the motivation side is doing what I call care to confront, right? And what that means is if a seller or if a sales leader realizes conflict, right? A seller is disputing over an account or a disagreement with a customer or even another seller, a good sales leader is really quick to resolve conflict. And when you do that, you build trust, and that ultimately creates an incredibly powerful, successful motivation in the office as well. So, and sometimes I find even that is leaders who don't address conflict and don't address it quickly can just obviously deflate the entire office as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Tom, I really appreciate the time that you've taken to be here today and meet with me. Is there any last advice, personal or professional, that you'd like to share with our viewers before we wrap up?
A little bit cliche, and we've talked about it a bit here. I think, at least in my career experience, what has really helped me the most, and because I sort of feel I have a sales DNA, and I always want to talk, and I want to build relationships, and I want to, go to events with clients, and I want to be part of their business. I'm just, generally a social person, and I'm a salesperson. And I think the professional advice I would give is what was difficult for me was to really stop talking as much and really listening. Because what ends up happening is if you truly listen and understand what clients' needs, what relationships you're trying to build, your conversations become that much more valuable, and they become that much more constructive, right? So as soon as I realized that I need to stop talking and I need to start listening, everything changed for me from a professional, but also a personal side as well. And I think that's probably the driving force that I would give advice to for people either in sales or outside of sales, is if you have that down as an art form and listening, then sky's the limit.
Absolutely. A very wise CEO who may or may not be the CEO of Next Level once told me that silence is where all of the decisions are made.
That's exactly right. Absolutely right, for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Tom. I've really appreciated having you on today. And to everyone watching, again, this is Next in Sales, the Next Level podcast. If you liked what Tom or I had to say today, I would highly encourage you to like, comment, subscribe, share this with your network, friends, family, anyone who you feel might be relevant. And I will see you again next week. Bye.